Well, we are, if I could get those who are here to come back in and sit down, because we want to wrap up what has been some incredible discussions throughout this year's AGOA Private Sector Forum by having two people who come from very different perspectives to share their thoughts on where we are in terms of AGOA, the U.S.-Africa trade and investment relationship. And we're really pleased to have British Robinson, who is the coordinator for the United States government's Prosper Africa initiative. Prosper Africa, as you know, is coordinating amongst 17 different U.S. government agencies that are involved in U.S.-Africa trade and investment in one way or another. So great to have British here to share her thoughts and what they're doing from the Prosper Africa perspective and a government perspective. And then we have Joss Betty, who I met, I don't know, what, 25 years ago or something, who is he wears several hats. He is a business person who owns and runs companies that are taking advantage of AGOA. He's in Kenya, Uganda, where else? Kenya and Uganda. I'm trying to expand him somewhere else, but Kenya and Uganda. But he also has been working very closely with the government of Kenya in terms of their export promotion strategy. So two different perspectives here. British, let's start with you and your thoughts, any major takeaways from today's discussion, as well as giving us some insight into Prosper Africa.
Thanks, Flory, and good afternoon to all. And again, as we said this morning, all protocols observed. It's an honor. I know that it's been kind of a long morning already, so hopefully we'll get through this pretty quickly. So lots of takeaways, Flory, but maybe I'll take a little bit of a step back and tie it to some of the comments that we heard earlier this morning. As Flory said, Prosper Africa really is a presidential national security initiative to catalyze at scale two-way trade and investment. So one of the key takeaways was the two-way piece. We are now heavily engaged in a two-way relationship. We heard earlier this morning that AGOA, when it was originally envisioned, it really was one way. And Prosper Africa is really was developed and created to be a solution that we go more than one way, that it's two-way, coordinating 17 agencies, utilizing their tools and instruments and resources to not only increase access to the markets, to do way more than to increase access to the market, but to fully support, again, another comment we heard today, the process, the protocols, alleviate the technical barriers, and really help enable the environment for better and more increased trade. You heard Secretary Blinken mention the big U.S.-Africa trade desk, which is a product, a venture of Prosper Africa. We are thrilled to have launched it in March with our trade team, set up to specifically de-risk sourcing from Africa at scale. We're currently looking at food products, but hopefully to expand various sectors. It's an innovative, demand-driven approach that's now connecting small and medium-sized enterprises, entrepreneurs, women owners, suppliers, African suppliers, directly with thousands of U.S. retailers. Some of those retailer outlets include Costco, Walmart, Target, Albertsons, Kroger, Dollar General, etc. So this is a new way of doing business for the U.S. government, not just looking at AGOA as that access point, but the facilitation and closing the ecosystem is the way I like to say it. And to close the ecosystem, we use better data to match it with U.S. consumer demands, which is something we heard earlier. Is this what the market really wants? So we are market-driven, private sector-driven, to grow the market share, to ensure that we're diversifying the global supply chains, and then aggregating those supports, again, as previously mentioned. The trade desk is critical because you have to really look at aggregation, which we've heard about, whether it's shea butter, avocados, table grapes, citrus from South Africa. You have to do the aggregation. But again, I'll go back to what I said before. You have to enable the environment. How are we enabling the supply, not just providing the access? To enable the supply, to just use one example, table grapes, which we announced, it's a $56 million deal that's about 2 weeks old. It's our very first deal. It's a major transaction. There'll be 700 containers of South African table grapes that the first time ever will reach the shores of the United States through one of the largest retailers. This is significant because it provides pricing stability for a key commodity in the U.S. market during off-season. So our large retailers cannot access at a decent price table grapes during the off-season. So we've now filled a gap for the need of U.S. large retailers, and we've enabled the market access. So that's the two-way piece. That is a concrete example of what we're talking about and how we can help not only talk about AGOA and the changes and make it successful, but to actually make it real. The additional support systems include logistics, trucking, rail, warehousing, customs, shipping, legal, labeling, dealing with all of the things we heard about that are requirements to get your product to market and actually received. So this model is a win for traceability. It gives the U.S. retailer full visibility in tracking the products, and it's something we hope that we, on behalf of the U.S. government, with some of our colleagues in U.S. government, will actually replicate amongst more sectors. So again, I underscore, if you take nothing else away, this one example means trade facilitation, not just access, trade facilitation. And that's one of the biggest takeaways that we heard this morning. I'll stop there. Thanks, Floyd.
Thank you. Thank you. That's exciting, to actually talk about not just the access, but the ability and the opportunity of AGOA, but the actual trade that can come from AGOA. And so we commend Prosper Africa and the Trade Desk Initiative as taking those first steps. We're excited to hear where it's going to go next. Joss, from your experience of many years and all the AGOA forums you've been to, share with us, all of us, your thoughts.
Thank you, Flory, and good afternoon to you all. I think the market has really moved on over the last 24 years, and you can see that. Initially, AGOA was all about cotton, and how can we add value to African cotton? How can we have a vertical supply chain? How can we create jobs in the entire ecosystem, like how British said, and how can we join the dots? And at that time, and even today, Africa exports about 70% of its cotton, raw cotton, to Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, Asia, and consumes very little. And what we've seen over this period of 24 years is the market shifts and market dynamics have totally changed, moved away, and like what Paul said this morning, the global consumption of synthetic fibers, largely polyester, today is 55 million tons, and cotton is 27 million tons. So it just tells you a story that there is a massive shift in how the customer looks at product. And if you look at that, you're looking at also what is a competitive and comparative advantage cotton vis-a-vis polyester. And especially for the US, the duty on cotton garments is 16-17%, on polyester garments is 32%. So for every $3, your buyer gets $1 back in duty on synthetic garments, and on every $1, your buyer gets 17 cents back on a cotton garment. So the competitive and comparative advantage is what people are looking at today, because Africa might not be very competitive when it comes to production and cost of production or unit cost of production. I mean, I think Africa's extra cost of doing business vis-a-vis Bangladesh or Vietnam or the Asian countries might be 10 to 15%, and that gets eroded straight away on a lower tariff into the US business. So people have started focusing away from the lower tariff to the US, to synthetics where the tariff is higher and still remain relevant and competitive. And we can see that in Kenya. We're the largest exporters for apparel to the US. We are the only country who lost 10.7% market share last year, as opposed to 21%, which Paul talked about this morning. and 70% of that product has become synthetic. And 20 years ago, 70% of that product was cotton. So it just tells you the demographics are changing, the market is changing, the consumption patterns are changing, and we can now see a lot more functionality in the technological advancement of polyester fiber. And give you a simple example, running apparel 25 years ago was all cotton. Today, running apparel is all synthetics by Nike and Adidas, and they have created functionality in stretch and absorption, which was not there. There's only one issue that they're still working on technologically. How can they remove odor, perspiration odor out of polyester? And that's a tall ask. So there is this whole massive shift going on in the world of consumption, and as we continue growing the market, I don't see the cotton pie growing. I only see the cotton pie shrinking, or rather the cotton pie staying stagnant at 27 million tons and everything else going up. That means your share of cotton will become very limited, will become very luxurious. And like Paul said, Africa doesn't, what is polyester? It comes from a petrochemical industry. We really don't have that. It's not even a textile industry. It's a byproduct of petroleum chemical industry, and that is massive investment. It runs into billions of dollars and not into hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's a big shift going on, and I think it's important that we do realize that shift, and whatever we decide henceforth must look at the demand that today's market is looking for and tomorrow's market will look at. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joss. Before I go back to British with maybe a tough question, I wondered if you would also share a little bit, Joss, about that drop that Kenya experienced in your exports last year, because I think people need to understand that even the most successful AGOA-eligible country in terms of apparel exports experienced a decline in your exports last year as companies and buyers anticipated or maybe had concerns about AGOA's extension. So I guess, what would you share with people about that and about the urgent need to extend AGOA?
Well, there's no doubt that we've got literally 14 months, just over 14 months today, to the expiry of the AGOA Trade Preference Program. We've got uncertainty in the air, uncertainty about market access, uncertainty about buyers placing business, uncertainty about the US elections and what comes out. And the last time this happened, 8 years ago, I think, we all know the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, TPP, was right up there. And overnight, it was right down here. And there is that big uncertainty who comes to the White House and how will that be treated? Will it continue to have bipartisan support, which I'm very sure AGOA will, but there's buyer nervousness out there. We had strong demand post-COVID, all of us, the entire world. 2022 exports out of Kenya, $570 million. Last year, $470 million. And this year, the numbers are stagnant. We're not seeing a big drop, but the buyers are really not placing business, and the investors are not expanding capacity. So that wait-and-see approach. And I don't think we can wait, because this business is placed like 8, 10, 12 months in advance. So it is crucial that this is done, and if it's done sooner, better than later, I think it'll keep the jobs on the continent.
Thank you, Joss. And I'm going to turn back to British. On this point of extending AGOA as soon as possible, even if it stays like it is, versus the idea that many of us believe that how can we make AGOA better? But this tension between the need and the urgency to extend it versus the opportunity to enhance it. And so, British, I wanted to ask you, based on your experience now leading Prosper Africa now for, what is it, almost a year? Just 1 year. She has done incredibly well in terms of leadership. All that you've done, I was like, wow, in 1 year. But like from the point of view of the trade desk and identifying specific producers in Africa and AGOA-eligible countries and shipping it here, if you had to share with us anything that could be in an enhanced AGOA, Of course, we're hoping that it will get passed quickly, but maybe there'll be some room to put some enhancements in. Are you seeing anything from your experience that would be helpful for people to consider in AGOA, or should we just continue with the things as they are and get the kind of support from Prosper Africa that buyers as well as sellers are getting now?
Yes, and it was tough. So, I have to, in my U.S. government capacity, I have to defer to the United States Congress. It's their privilege to renew or not renew AGOA. And obviously, our representative, Ambassador Tai, speaks on behalf of the U.S. government when we're talking about that. Let me answer your question in a different way. So we talked about trade facilitation, absolutely critical. That's part of the ecosystem that we're trying to build through our trade work, our trade portfolio, our two-way trade and investment work at Prosper Africa. Part and parcel of that for us is to look at all the various sort of opportunities related to, that's why we're looking at the facilitation piece, the ecosystem piece, even the financing piece. So again, when we look at AGOA 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, again, a lot of that is just about access. We're talking about true facilitation, so the entire continuum. The other end of that, which I didn't hear today at all, is the financing end. So we're looking for financiers, investors, to see, someone mentioned it slightly early this morning, but trade and investment go together. So we are about two-way trade and investment at scale. These are inextricably linked. I think currently we look at AGOA as just this purist kind of viewpoint, but we would widen that aperture. Because from experience, what we found is we can talk to all the African suppliers until the cows come home, regardless of the sector. But if they don't have financing, they don't have letters of credit on the other end, it doesn't matter. So access becomes mute if you don't close the ecosystem circle. So that's number one. The second thing I would add to that is when I think about other sectors that are absolutely critical, we have a person on our team that is an expert in ICT. I think we heard very clearly from members of the PAC-DBIA that work with Commerce, our colleagues at Commerce, which is part of one of the 17 agencies that we coordinate and collaborate with, Visa, Google, Boeing, all of them. Catalysts for growth on the continent. And in addition to goods, it's not only goods, but we have to be about the technology, the digital transformation, the fintech, AI. That is a significant part that we could have never envisioned 20 years ago, right? So it's practical and it's tactical. We are doubling down on investing in entrepreneurs. You were talking about Kenya. Incredible entrepreneurs, particularly in the fintech space. We have open RFP windows around tech and fintech and trying to grow the entrepreneurial space, small and medium-sized enterprises, women-owned businesses. But let's not mistake, you don't just increase the products, whatever they are, going to market without a good, robust fintech, digital transformation, financial payments, as Visa was talking about. These things are all connected. So at Prosper Africa, we are about connecting those things, and we think that, therefore, enables, strengthens AGOA, because it's just a tool. We're trying to make it active, make it real. And our work is to help with the actual utilization of it, and these things are connected. And so we're tying that investment piece, we're tying the infrastructure piece together. I heard some of that today, but I think it's really important to kind of underscore the connection as I not answer your question. Thank you.
That was a very good not answer, British. And important points that you raised about how we can open the aperture in terms of how we look at AGOA. Many people understand that for the Africans, in fact, services, someone talked about services contributes more to African GDP than goods trade. So, but when people say, let's add services to AGOA, I say, well, what does that mean? Because AGOA is about tariffs. Like, how do you add services to AGOA? But maybe that's something that people need to be thinking about. Same thing, digital. How do you add digital and ICT to AGOA? if it's not, an actual product, it's a service. So, maybe we need to put on our creative and innovative thinking caps to look at what needs to happen. People are also talking about, well, on the Hill, folks are looking at taking third country fabric, away under an extended AGOA. What can be done that would not give the benefits of AGOA to China? I was up on the Hill the other day, and someone said, "Well, we don't want the benefits of AGOA to go to China." And Paul was with that same group. He said, "But the Africans don't have any man-made fiber on the continent, so they'd have to get it from somewhere. And if you say it can't come from China, then where is it going to come from?" So maybe again we have to think creatively about what we can do. So maybe let me ask you to also talk about, I'm not sure how much more time we have, but to talk a little bit about what you see as the way forward over the next 3 to 6 months, like your vision for what could happen that would be really good from your perspective in terms of that. I know, British, you have a lot of things coming up with how your trade desk initiative is evolving. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about where you see it going, how you're gonna, where you're gonna go next. I think you shared with me that it's focused in the agribusiness food sector right now, but maybe there's a way that this can be used as a model for other sectors. I don't know if you're ready to share that yet, but just kind of looking forward and being visionary. What do you think?
Sure. Let me add one other point that I heard from, again, I think it was a PAC-DB I made from Pfizer. I was at PEPFAR, I think you knew, for about 6 or 7 years, and the healthcare infrastructure is an interesting piece as it was raised in the context of AGOA earlier this morning. The regulatory harmonization and I think the mitigation of, or adding track and trace programs, there's some things there as well around health infrastructure. I would be remiss if I just didn't call that out because we did hear that earlier today. For us, I mean, again, AGOA is also about, and I think we heard this from our colleagues at Carnegie, but also helping to support and create African economies, plural, right? It's more than. That's the part that we sometimes miss or forget. And when we think about creating Africa's economies and being a part of its economic growth, we're looking at what are the fastest growing sectors as well. And a piece of that, we were talking about whether it's cotton or polyester or whatever the fabrics are, is the creative sector. And in particular, the fashion sector and industry. There's a real opportunity for us to look at that as potentially as part and parcel of this broader conversation. So that's something as one of the faster growing sectors for us to be conscious of and to think about. You hear about it a little bit, but not in the broader context of textiles, apparel, and we know that's a huge part of job creation and job creation for women, and it's exploding in a handful of countries right now. So that's something that we are looking at, and it is connected to potentially to AGOA and its platform, if you will.
That's a good one. And Joss, from the perspective of a Kenyan business person and someone in the apparel sector, when you look at the next maybe 3 to 6 months, what's your vision? What are you thinking can be done from Kenya's end in terms of taking advantage of AGOA, helping people to think clearly about what makes sense going forward and what may not make sense?
Thank you, Flory. I think on a Kenyan perspective, we've actually not slowed down promotion and not slowed down investment. And maybe we were a little bit fortunate in the last 2 to 3 years when Kenya was already negotiating an FTA with the US that migrated into a STIP, a STIP trade and investment partnership agreement. So the comfort with the buyers is a little bit stronger compared to the rest of Africa because we call it the insurance. We have an insurance if AGOA is not fully utilized, and that insurance would be, there will be some sort of arrangement that will come in, and that might become the model for the rest of Africa, and if adopted right. So on a worst-come-worst scenario, we've not seen major decline in our exports, and that's why I said last year the average for Africa was 21.3%. Kenya's decline was only 10.3%, and I think that 10.3% was probably to do with too much inventory in the US post-COVID, because the COVID inventory correction was also happening, and it's not only for Africa, it was happening for the entire world. So even the rest of the world, exports to the US were down by 22%. So we have that, and even as we speak, we are seeing people who are willing to invest in Kenya and looking at the excellent Kenya-US relationship. We are also seeing people are now looking at how can we exit China, or how can we replace China in some way or the other. And also there is a possibility that a lot of European business which went to Bangladesh and Vietnam because they had duty-free market access to, and Bangladesh now graduated out of developing status but still duty-free for the next couple of years. But we're seeing that we have an EPA, an Economic Partnership Agreement, open-ended European market. So worst come worst, like Ethiopian factories, the ones that are surviving, are also having largely with the European business. So we have a plan A and a plan B. Plan B is obviously US, where the tariff is high. It makes much more commercial sense and much more profit. But a plan B is okay, fine, we won't make that much money, but then the European market is also opening up, and if Bangladesh is put on duty by 2027, that's what I hear, that's going to be a 13% or 12% advantage for African companies, and especially countries that have already had that open-ended agreement. Like for Kenya, we have an open-ended agreement, and we don't have to talk 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's just there, it's duty-free. So slightly different dynamics. And of course, we are looking at the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Today, I think is the first day where the TFTA also takes effect. 14 countries out of 28 have signed up and ratified. And I think it was 25th of July is when these 14 countries are going to start working, that SADC, COMESA, EAC. That itself is a huge opportunity that the three blocks have agreed they're going to have duty-free, they're going to have an FTA. So, and if you look at the phase down of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, I was actually very shocked. There's a whole tariff countdown up to 2031. You can actually choose a country that I'm living in Mali and I want to export to Botswana. What will be the tariff on tea, or what will be the tariff on, production goods? So there's a phase down. It's already started. And for example, I'll give you an example for Kenya. Tea duty into South Africa is 400 cents a kilo. That means $4 specific duty, as opposed to ad valorem. And right now, that duty is already down to 240 cents, 2.4, as opposed to Sri Lankan tea or Indian tea. So already we are seeing intra-Africa trade looking up.
Increasing. Wonderful. Well, that is a great note to end on. I thank both British Robinson, the White House coordinator of Prosper Africa, and Jas Betty on behalf of the Kenya Export Promotion Network there, as well as a longstanding apparel producer himself, for your insights. I really appreciate that. Thank you to all of you that are here. I don't know, should I just give my vote of thanks? I don't have my papers with me, but let me just say that this AGOA Forum, as I said earlier, may be one of the most important ones. It is one that comes at a time when there are tremendous things happening on the continent, apart from their relationship with us. You're looking at AfCFTA implementation. There are things happening globally in terms of shifts in production and production patterns. As Jas was just talking about, folks looking to make their supply chains more resilient, and looking at Africa as the place where they need to manufacture and produce various items that have been produced in other regions of the world previously. And then also, obviously, from the U.S. side, many things that are now happening as we head to our national elections and thinking about what the U.S. Congress will be like, how will it be, who will lead, because we know this is very critical also for AGOA renewal, AGOA enhancement. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you to all of the panelists and speakers, those of you who are AGOA lovers like myself, enthusiasts, I should say, like myself, and on behalf of Corporate Council on Africa, we are closing our session today, but we invite you to stay in close touch with us over the next months as we look to find out what will happen on AGOA and its renewal, hopefully sooner rather than later. Thank you very much. And let me remind all of you, please do come to our reception this evening. I hope most of you have signed up for the AGOA Private Sector Forum reception that's happening back here this evening at 5:30. Thank you very much.